Welcome back to another episode of the What We're Watching podcast. I'm Megan.
And I'm Jenny, and today we're talking about You've Got Mail.
A fall classic. I'm so excited to be talking about this.
I've never seen this movie.
Wow.
Isn't that crazy?
I love this movie so much.
Okay, I thought it was really cute, but I definitely was expecting the humor of When Harry Met Sally. And it wasn't that, but it was still so good.
Have you seen Sleepless in Seattle?
Yes, but it was a long time ago.
Okay.
Is this more like that?
Yes.
Minus the Meg Ryan, Tom Hanks similarities.
But I think that's part of it because it doesn't have Billy Crystal, and I think Billy Crystal is such a big part of the like rougher edge humor, just like haha laugh out loud funniness that happens in When Harry Met Sally, other than the fact that obviously it happened at a different time. But
when we did that episode, did we talk about him improvising a lot of the lines? I'm so curious if he did.
I don't know. I can't remember, but that wouldn't surprise me at all.
Yeah. This movie was funny and cute, and I watched it with Robert, and even he enjoyed it, so it's boy approved. But it definitely was a different vibe, so I wasn't expecting it. But I liked it, and it's such a good fall movie.
Yeah, I'm really excited because for the next 3 weeks, I feel like all the movies we're covering are the epitome of fall.
Yes.
And I love them all, and I'm so excited for you guys to hear them.
Me too. And I'm glad I watched this one because I feel like this is just a classic that I've been missing out on, and it comes up on the podcast a lot, I feel like.
For whatever reason, and I didn't realize this was a thing, I think a lot of people watch this movie every fall as part of their just like fall routine, because I've seen it all over social media this fall. I've noticed it, which makes me think that everybody just really enjoys it and likes it, and that makes it make more sense why I feel so seasonal, you know?
That's a really cute tradition. I love that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm that way with Halloween movies, or at least I feel like I used to be, but now that we have so many movies that we watch each week for the podcast, I kind of don't watch movies in my free time.
Yeah.
I want to do that. I want to make everything seasonal again.
I know.
Like Ice Princess every winter. That would be fun.
Totally. Just a quick reminder, if you guys are excited about all the fall movies coming up, to leave us a review and to follow us on social media at What We're Watching Pod.
We have so much fun over there on Instagram, so hit us up. We like to talk to you guys.
Okay, so the logline for You've Got Mail is book superstore magnate Joe Fox and independent bookshop owner Kathleen Kelly fall in love in the anonymity of the internet, both blissfully unaware that he's trying to put her out of business.
I think what's so nostalgic and wonderful about this movie is just their approach to the internet.
Yeah.
And it being a new thing, and like internet dating wasn't really a thing yet, so everything's very innocent and pen pally.
It feels very like novel.
Yes.
Like the idea of a chat room being so exciting, and like you've never met anybody online before and everyone else thinks it's crazy, and you would never see that person in person.
Also the dial-up sounds and the You've Got Mail. Love. So nostalgic.
The computer voice, I know. Okay, so this movie came out on December 18th, 1998, which is pretty late into the year. I was actually kind of surprised to read that.
Yeah, for such a fall movie. But it is kind of a holiday movie too, I would say.
Mm-hmm. And just for reference, because I was curious about this, a lot of people talk about the Meg Ryan like triad of movies, which include the ones we've already mentioned, When Harry Met Sally and Sleepless in Seattle. So just for timeline's sake, because I was curious about this one is last. So When Harry Met Sally came out in 1989, 9 years before, and then Sleepless in Seattle, which also stars Tom Hanks, came out in 1993, 5 years before. So it was basically every 5 years for 10 years.
What a time to be alive.
I know.
I was only alive for half of that.
Same.
Not even.
And yet it still feels nostalgic for me. Did it give you a sense of nostalgia even though you just watched it for the first time?
Oh, yeah. And something about the sets was really interesting to me, too. Like, in Meg Ryan's room, there's, like, this grandma quilt on the bed, and everything is kind of like your grandma's house. Like, that's what it looks like to me. I was thinking about it. I was like, oh, well, she was the cool girl in New York with a bookstore, and this is her room. And it's so different than, like, the cool girl on TV's room nowadays.
Yeah, it's pre-Instagram and TikTok aesthetic.
Yes, it was so lived in and cozy, and I think that's another reason why these movies are so great. It's not just the storyline, but it's also the sets are just really cozy.
I actually think you're 1,000% right saying that it's lived in, and that's why people like it so much. Because you know, we've talked about this in a few episodes, but everyone is obsessed with the Nancy Meyers house aesthetic and like the house from Father of the Bride and all of that. And to me, all the Nora Ephron movies like this one give the same exact aesthetic.
Same.
And I think that's it. I think it's just lived in and of the time. It's just like well decorated for that time. And you can tell somebody lives there and it's very warm. And I just love it. But it is interesting to me that people don't talk about Nora Ephron the way they talk about Nancy Meyers on social media.
Yeah, that's kind of interesting. I wonder why that is. I wonder if it's because the Nancy Meyers movies, at least the ones I'm thinking of, were more likely to be seen by Gen Z.
Could be. Yeah, they're a little more recent.
But Nora Ephron is like, you know, a legend. So
Totally.
Outside of social media, or at least our corner of social media, I feel like she does get the Nancy Meyers treatment.
Definitely. And Nora Ephron, if you guys don't remember, is responsible for When Harry Met Sally, Sleepless in Seattle, obviously, Bewitched, Julie and Julia, among a bunch of others. Delia Ephron, Nora's sister, also helped write this movie.
Okay, I saw that. I was like, is that her daughter or her sister?
It's her sister. Yeah. I believe she also worked on When Harry Met Sally. So I think we talked about the two of them then as well in that episode. And a lot of you guys might know this if you're familiar with the movie. This movie is actually based on a very old play called Parfumery. And that was written by Miklos Laszlo. Probably butchering his name, sorry. And that play was actually used as the inspiration for 3 famous movies, including The Shop Around the Corner, In the Good Old Summertime, and this one, You've Got Mail. And You've Got Mail also does take inspiration from The Shop Around the Corner, which I think is probably why Meg's store in the movie is called Shop Around the Corner.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, so I just think it's interesting. There's like so many links between this movie and other things, including, you guys might know that this movie was also heavily inspired by Pride and Prejudice.
Wink, wink, guys. Another fall classic.
We'll talk about this when we get to the recap, but Kathleen, which is Meg Ryan's character, even says that Pride and Prejudice is her favorite book as a nod to the inspiration for the movie.
When she said that Pride and Prejudice was her favorite book at the beginning, I was like, I wonder if this is a retelling of Pride and Prejudice.
A little bit.
And yeah, it definitely is in a lot of ways.
So another fun fact about somebody that worked on this movie, Kevin Feige, I believe that's how you say his last name, who is the current day president of Marvel, was a production assistant on this movie.
Oh, a production assistant. That's how he got his start.
Yep. He actually helped Meg Ryan learn how to use her first computer on set for this movie.
She had to learn how to use the computer for this role.
I don't know if it was for this role or if she just had one and was like working on it. I was imagining her like trying to figure out how to use it in her trailer or something. Although computers were so big, maybe she wouldn't have had one in her trailer. So yeah, maybe it was just on set.
That's so cute. He's like, here's how you check your mail.
Yeah.
Here's what dial-up is. That is so cute.
I know.
I love that. Was this a movie that you grew up watching?
Yep.
Okay. Your mom loved this movie, I assume?
Yes, my mom loves this movie. This one and Sleepless in Seattle I grew up watching.
Okay. And you hadn't seen When Harry Met Sally, had you?
No, which is crazy to me.
That's so interesting.
But it makes sense why I like it so much. That still is one of my favorite episodes we've ever done because I had never seen that movie and then I loved it so much. That was like such a fun surprise.
Yeah, fun fact, When Harry Met Sally is in my top 4 on Letterboxd.
Wow.
If you're not familiar with Letterboxd, you can choose your top 4 movies of all time. And it's on my top 4.
High honors. What else?
Juno.
Of course.
Obviously. The Princess Diaries.
Oh.
And this one, I think I'm going to take off. Jennifer's Body.
Do you have any ideas for a substitute?
No, but we cover so many good movies that I know I have a favorite that's above Jennifer's Body, but I need to think about it, you know? What would be your top 4?
Oh gosh, probably also Princess Diaries. Maybe this one.
Uh-huh.
Oh no. Okay. Booksmart, Everything Everywhere All at Once, Princess Diaries, probably Freaky Friday.
Oh my gosh, great choices. Great choices. I bow down to how fast you made that decision.
Thank you.
It was so quick.
Thank you.
All right, should we talk more about the cast?
Let's do it.
Let's talk about Meg Ryan, who plays Kathleen.
So I've said this a bunch of times, obviously, but you guys know Meg Ryan from When Harry Met Sally, which we do have an episode on, Sleepless in Seattle, Top Gun, As the World Turns, Anastasia, and so many more. I feel like she was the it romantic comedy girl of the 90s.
Who was she in Anastasia? Is she Anastasia? Hold on, I have to look. She is Anastasia.
Wow.
Have you seen that movie?
I don't think so.
I think we've talked about this. That is a great winter movie.
Okay.
And it is one of my favorite animated movies, at least as a kid. So.
Okay, you guys will have to let us know. Should we cover that this winter?
I had no idea she was Anastasia. That's crazy. I'm going to tell Robert that when I get off of this call with you.
So Meg grew up in Connecticut and was raised by 2 teachers.
Love.
You guys know, this is my favorite thing, when superstars were raised by regular people. And then she went to NYU for journalism and acted in commercials and one soap called As the World Turns to earn extra money.
Her going to NYU for journalism is the most rom-com thing of her to do. She was made for this.
Become a writer, like all of the rom-com girls, yeah.
Wow.
And as I think it's interesting, her birth name is Margaret Mary Emily Ann Hyra, but she started going by Meg Ryan because Ryan is her mother's maiden name when she joined SAG.
Meg Ryan is easier to say, for sure.
Much. And then she was married to and had a kid with Dennis Quaid, and they were married for 10 years. And he is the dad from The Parent Trap. They were married from 1991 to 2001, and they have a son, Jack Quaid, who is an actor, and he plays one of the leads in The Boys. If you guys listened to our When Harry Met Sally episode, you heard me have a complete mental breakdown over this because I had no idea that Jack Quaid was related. I actually didn't even know that his name was Jack Quaid, but I knew him from The Boys, and he looks just like Meg Ryan, so that was fun.
I love that. I love when we have those moments on the podcast. They're so fun.
Yeah. Meg also has a daughter named Daisy, who she adopted from China in 2006. And this was interesting about this specific role in You've Got Mail. Meg almost turned the role down because she felt like she was getting pigeonholed into romantic comedies. And she even said, quote, "I was getting locked into that. It was starting to get irritating. So I want to say this was the last rom-com she did for like 15 years or something."
Wow. Yeah, because didn't she just do a rom-com like last year or something?
Mm-hmm. That was her first one back.
Are you kidding?
Mm-mm.
So after You've Got Mail, there was that long, and she's still known as the rom-com queen?
Yeah, but I think that probably is partially because, sorry, this is probably such a rude thing to say, but like, did she do a lot between those times? Maybe she did. Maybe she did a bunch of dramas and they just didn't blow up, or I can't think of them right now. But these movies were so iconic, and she did 3 of them, and 2 of them were with Tom Hanks, and he is also so iconic and famous. But it is interesting because Tom Hanks did not get pigeonholed into this, but he also did a lot of other things that were really famous. So I don't know.
It's such a tricky thing because I can imagine that it would be irritating as an actor to get pigeonholed into a certain kind of thing when you want maybe more serious roles or something else. Like, I think Pamela Anderson talks about this in her documentary. But to me, I'm like, if you had kept doing rom-coms, would you have had more freedom to do other stuff, you know?
Yeah, it's hard to say, because this is the same thing that Matthew McConaughey went through when he was doing a bunch of rom-coms in the early 2000s and did How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days, Failure to Launch.
Oh, that's one of your top 4.
Oh yeah, How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days, for sure. You're right.
Yeah.
You're right. You're totally right.
I'm so curious what your Letterboxd top 4 is for anybody listening. Just even if you don't have Letterboxd, what are your 4 movies that you would say are your top 4 movies of all time? Very curious if they align with ours.
Yeah, I would love to know, actually. But Matthew McConaughey talks about feeling pigeonholed, and so he started turning down movies, and it was a huge risk, but then he ended up doing Dallas Buyers Club, and that was iconic and famous and firmly planted him in the dramatic acting world. So it worked out for him, but I can imagine it just doesn't work like that for everybody, obviously. Yeah. And I can also see, as a woman, maybe that would be harder.
Maybe that's what it is, because it's like Matthew McConaughey and Tom Hanks broke out of this, but maybe it would be harder for her.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. That sucks, though.
But like Jennifer Aniston, I think, has done a great job of coming out of that. She's done some amazing dramatic roles. Anyway, that was a reason why she almost didn't do this movie. And then I found a couple of quotes of her not feeling like resentful necessarily of this movie, but definitely I couldn't find quotes of her looking back at this movie like, "It was amazing. I'm so happy I did it." She was just like, yeah, at that time I was really pigeonholed. That was kind of the sentiment.
That's so interesting.
Yeah.
And then we have Tom Hanks, who plays Joe Fox.
Joe Fox. You guys know him from everything, right? Forrest Gump, The Terminal, A Man Called Otto, Toy Story, Saving Private Ryan, Sleepless in Seattle, Sully, Big, Polar Express. I could go on for days. Reading about how he got into acting was really interesting. So he started doing theater in high school, but then he couldn't get cast in any college plays. So he auditioned for a community theater play, got cast in that, and the director of that play developed like a mentorship with him and brought him to Cleveland to start his acting career.
Random.
And he ended up getting an internship in Cleveland working behind the scenes, like in tech at a theater.
Okay. That is very random, I feel like.
Yeah. It just makes me feel like he had a normal kind of entry into Hollywood. Like, I couldn't find anything, and I'm sure he had this to some extent because everybody who makes it, I feel like, does end up meeting the right people at the right time. But I couldn't find any like, oh, he had this super famous family friend or anything like that. He just worked in this theater and then I think started auditioning.
Cool.
He actually got his real start in Hollywood when he was cast in the leading role for Splash, which is a Ron Howard film, which was a surprise hit. And he actually auditioned for a smaller role in that, and then Ron Howard wanted him for the lead.
Love that. That just shows like his natural acting ability, I feel like, from the get-go.
Definitely. So I didn't actually know this before. Tom has been married twice, and he has 4 kids. I know of a couple of the kids. We'll talk about them in a second. First, he was married to Samantha Luz, I believe that's how you say her last name, from 1978 to 1987. So it's a pretty long time. And they had 2 kids, Colin and Elizabeth Ann. Colin looks just like his dad. So if you ever see Tom Hanks with a son that looks just like him, it's Colin. And I believe he's an actor too. And Colin is married to a woman named Samantha Bryant. And so Tom a lot of times refers to his 5 kids. And it's because he's including Colin's wife, Samantha, in that.
I love that.
Yeah.
We love a supportive father-in-law.
Love it. I read this quote that he said about having, these 2 kids in his first marriage. He said, quote, "They remember when their dad was just a guy trying to, make the rent. My other kids, they were born after I had established a beachhead in every way. And so their lives were just different."
That is so interesting. I'm trying to imagine being siblings with 2 younger siblings who now know my dad is famous and like didn't know him that way before.
And have a famous mom.
Yeah, and like I grew up normally with my dad hustling. That's unique.
Very unique.
Cool. I like that.
So then he got married to Rita Wilson, which I feel like is his much more famous relationship, in 1988, which is the year after he got divorced. So that is very soon. I did not deep dive into like, was he separated for a while? He definitely might have been. I don't know. But interesting. And they're still together. There's a ton of pictures of them online. It's very cute. And they have 2 kids named Chet and Truman. Are you aware of Chet Hanks as a person?
No.
Okay.
I'm thinking of Chet You Betcha from The Fairly Odd Parents. Did you ever watch that show?
I did, but I don't know who Chet is.
Okay. Never mind. Ignore me. Continue.
Okay. Chet is wild. Chet is like an unhinged frat star psycho boy that I would never, ever think was related to Tom Hanks. Not because of who Tom Hanks is, but because I feel like everyone has a picture of Tom Hanks as like this sweetheart dad, even though he's really like a comedian and much more rough around the edges, I think, than people ascribe to him. But anyway, Chet is please Google Chet Hanks right now and see the photos that come up. You'll understand what I'm saying.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh. Okay, so yeah.
Makes a lot of videos on social media.
Interesting guy.
Wild. Wild. The AI description of him, guys, like, when you type things in on Google now and it comes up with a snippet, I think like the quote that it pulls calls him a spoiled brat.
Oh.
If that's any indicator.
Is this because he grew up with famous parents and his brother and sister did not?
I don't know why Chet is the way that he is. I don't know.
Interesting.
I don't know, but it's wild. Like, I remember where I was when I found out about Chet Hanks, because I just didn't know that he existed until my like old friends at work showed me. Watch some of his videos sometime if you ever need a laugh.
Okay, sounds good. I love this kind of thing.
So Tom Hanks also almost turned down the role in this movie because so many people were comparing him to Jimmy Stewart at the time. And Jimmy Stewart was the lead in The Shop Around the Corner, which was part of the inspiration for this movie.
He didn't want more comparisons. I get that.
But thankfully, They both did it.
Thank goodness. I'm actually so surprised that there are 2 huge rom-coms starring the exact same people.
And like written and made by the same person too.
Yeah, because to me, I'm just like, how do you not like get those movies mixed up? Or like, I don't know, how does it not feel like a repeat of the first one?
And there are parts of the story that are similar. So it is interesting.
Yeah, and it's like if you threw Billy Crystal back in with Meg Ryan, we would have another When Harry Met Sally.
Totally.
You know, it's definitely the actors that help make a rom-com a rom-com.
So true, yeah.
That's the whole thing. We don't remember the plots necessarily of rom-coms. We remember the leads.
Yeah, like the magic of the two of them.
Exactly.
Definitely.
How interesting. Okay, well, I loved all those fun facts. And I know we've talked about Tom Hanks and Rita Wilson a lot lately because of their production company. Tom Hanks has a production company, and Rita Wilson, I think, also owns it, works on it, something. But they are the reason why My Big Fat Greek Wedding got made. And we talked about it in that episode.
Right.
So I just think that's interesting. And I think there was one other episode we talked about where they came up again. So
famous couple.
I honestly don't think I knew who Rita Wilson was before we started this podcast. So the more you know. We also have more cast shout outs in the recap because there were a lot of cameos or famous people in this movie. So we'll talk about them when we get to them.
Should we get into the recap?
Let's do it. So the movie opens and we're in New York City, of course. It wouldn't be a Nora Ephron movie without New York City. Sleepless in Seattle is in Seattle.
Except Sleepless in
Never mind. Forget everything I said.
So for the most part, New York is such a safe bet for any 2000s, 90s or 2000s rom-com. Like 95% of them are in New York.
Kathleen Kelly wakes up for work in her gorgeous townhouse. Her boyfriend comes into the bedroom ranting about an article that he's reading in the paper. And just shout out, this is played by Greg Kinnear, who is the father from The Last Song.
Love.
I was trying to figure out where I knew him from.
I totally did not realize that that's where he's from, yeah.
Yeah, we just talked about him recently. Her boyfriend's name is Frank, and he and Kathleen agree to go to sushi together that night, and he leaves for work. Once he's gone, Kathleen checks all the windows and doors to make sure that he's not coming back, and then she logs onto her computer and signs into a chat room. She's like sneaking around because he just made it very clear that he doesn't like or trust technology. He was like kind of spouting off his views on it. And it reminded me very much of the AI conversation. It was so similar. And then when she logs into her chat room, her screen name is Shop Girl. The computer says, "Welcome, you've got mail." And we hear a voiceover of the message that she receives. It's from a man saying he loves New York in the fall.
And then we cut to Joe Fox, and he's eating breakfast in his New York apartment while his girlfriend, Patricia, played by Parker Posey, runs around the apartment and she's getting ready for work. And she says that he better be at her work benefit that night because he promised. But we can tell that he's really not excited to go. And then when she leaves for work, he checks his computer and it says the same thing. "Welcome, you've got mail." And he reads Shop Girl's response. So this is where we as the audience know that Tom Hanks and Meg Ryan are talking, but they obviously don't know who the other person is. Shop Girl's response says that she likes to pretend they're the oldest and dearest friends instead of random people who met in a chat room. And she says every time she logs in, her breath catches in her chest until she hears those 3 little words, "You've got mail." She says, "I have mail from you." And like this, I wish I could remember the song, but this like iconic 2000s song starts playing and it's like giving romance vibes immediately. And as an adult watching this is such a big red flag. I don't know if you had an issue with this, but watching it, I'm like, they're just fully having these emotional affairs with no qualms.
Robert and I said the exact same thing. We were like, okay, they're cheating. They're cheating.
Yeah.
This is bad. But this was before internet, like, I don't know. Do we give them a pass because it's like before this was a thing?
I don't think so. Because if you were emailing somebody at work, this type of shit, but I guess there wasn't email. Is that your point?
I mean, this is email, what they're doing.
Yeah.
But I don't know. Also, did you ever have like an AOL email or like anything that went, "You've got mail"?
No.
I think that was AOL.
Mm-mm.
Oh, I remember that so well. I didn't have an AOL email, but I must have known somebody who did because I heard it all the time.
That's cute.
Yeah, I don't know. Why is it okay in this movie?
It's not. It's just romanticized. I think a lot of the early 2000s and 90s movies romanticize this idea of like if you're not with the right person, but then you find the right person, then it's okay. That like makes it okay, you know? It's like this very romantic idea of like you're with somebody, but your life is boring and it's so mundane. And then like somebody hits you like lightning and then everything changes. And it's okay to leave for that person, which it is totally. It's just very romanticized in these movies, I think. And because I'm also thinking of, I think this happens in When Harry Met Sally. This happens
Yes.
in Sleepless in Seattle.
Oh, this is a Nora Ephron thing. This also happens in Letters to Juliet.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's a rom-com trope.
Yeah.
But it felt kind of icky now. Like, I think this part didn't age as well because they didn't address it. Or when they did address it, it wasn't considered cheating.
Yeah.
Interesting. Then we see Joe and Kathleen cross paths repeatedly on their way to work, but they never actually bump into each other or even notice each other or talk. And Joe shows up to work, which is currently a construction site where they're building this huge bookstore. He says they're going to seduce the whole Upper West Side with discounts and a cappuccino.
And then Kathleen gets to her bookshop called The Shop Around the Corner. And we see these kind of side-by-side scenes of Joe and Kathleen at work. And they're both acting so like aloof and just like in la la land because they're in such good moods from the messages they got that morning. And both of their coworkers actually ask what's going on with them and assume that it's because of their actual partners, Patricia and Frank. But eventually, Kathleen tells her employee, Christina, who's played by Heather Burns, who is Cheryl/Miss Rhode Island in Miss Congeniality. We talked a lot about her in that episode. And so she tells Christina about how she met her mysterious chat room man. So that's the first person that finds out. I thought this was a fun fact. I read that the bookstore that they used for Kathleen's bookshop in the movie was actually a cheese shop in New York that they transformed because Nora loved the vibe of it.
Oh, cute.
Mm-hmm.
It was very small, so it kind of makes sense. It was a cheese shop. That's funny, though. Then Joe talks to his father and grandfather in his office about the growing concern from the neighborhood about putting in a book superstore. We learn that Fox Books is their family business, and they talk about all the local bookstores in the area that are going under or that they think will go under soon. One of the stores Joe mentions is the Shop Around the Corner, and his grandfather says he used to exchange letters with the old owner of the store, Cecilia Kelly, who is Kathleen's mom. He says that she was enchanting. And this kind of made me think that this movie needs a prequel, like a prequel of them exchanging letters versus emails, because it's basically the same story.
That would be cute.
Except his grandfather was way older than Cecilia.
Yeah. I think he even says, like, she was too young for me, which is interesting because then we meet his, like, 5-year-old child shortly after this.
Was that his child?
Yes.
Oh.
Yes. Then we see a series of short scenes where Joe and Kathleen are sending emails back and forth. And in one of the emails, Kathleen mentions that Pride and Prejudice is her favorite book.
Kathleen and her employees, Christina and George, stand in the street looking at the new Fox Books sign across the street from them. And I had to stop. I paused everything and I was like, who is George? Because he has such a unique face.
Yes, he does.
And I was like, he's so familiar. I know he's in something else. He's from White Lotus. The actor's name is Steve Zahn.
He's also from Daddy Daycare. That's always what I remember him from.
Love it. Kathleen isn't worried about the Fox Books that's coming up across the street because she says that Fox won't offer good customer service like they do.
And Fox Books, for context, is supposed to be based on Barnes & Noble.
Oh, I knew I loved it.
Mm-hmm.
Every time I saw Fox Books, I was like, I want to go in there.
Then he's like, I like the big chain.
I love capitalism.
Then we see Joe spend a morning on his boat, and Jillian, who's his father's soon-to-be 5th wife, comes by and drops off 2 little kids for Joe to watch for the day. And we learn that these kids are his father's son and his grandfather's daughter, because they've both been remarried several times to much, much younger women, so they have these little kids. And it's very obvious immediately that Joe is great with kids and they love him. Like, we get a couple scenes of just like classic Tom Hanks with little kids, endearing cuteness. And he spends the day with them around New York, and they go to a fall festival, and then they go to Kathleen's bookstore. And Kathleen bonds with the 2 kids and Joe, and it's very cute, and they like have lots of chit chat, and you can tell they're both great with kids. And then as Joe is checking out, Kathleen mentions that they're putting a Fox Books in across the street, and the kids almost mention that Fox is their last name. Because Kathleen's just like kind of talking shit. Like she's like, see, our customers like you love us. They won't go to Fox Books. And the kids almost, like I said, the kids almost say that that's their name. But Joe manages to keep them quiet so that he can keep talking to Kathleen.
I love that the little boy, too, he can only spell his last name, Fox, and he's like, F-O-X. And he almost lets it book. She's like, oh, can you spell dog? And he's like, F-O-X. So cute. Then we jump forward a small amount of time, and Kathleen and her employees decorate the store for Christmas and talk about how much their profits have declined in just the few weeks that Fox Books has been open. Kathleen is still extremely optimistic and reassures everyone that they're not going to close. An author even comes in and says that she's happy to help in any way she can, including getting them a profile in a publication. She says maybe that nut from the Observer can write one, and we learn that she means Kathleen's boyfriend, Frank.
Poor Frank.
He just wrote a piece. I don't even remember what it was about, like typewriters or something.
Mm-hmm.
He wrote a piece that everyone's calling him a nut job.
Yeah. Then one night we see that Joe and his girlfriend Patricia go to the same party as Kathleen and Frank. And they say hi to each other at the bar, and then afterwards someone comes up to Kathleen and says, I can't believe you were talking to Joe Fox. And this is This is the first time Kathleen realizes who Tom Hanks is, that he is Joe Fox, responsible for the big bookstore across the street. And so she confronts him and accuses him of spying on her that day that he came to the store with those two kids. And he calls her store a charming little bookstore, but we can tell that he doesn't see it as any real competition. He's like talking down to her about it. And then Patricia and Frank come up, so their partners come up and join the conversation. And it turns out that Patricia is a huge fan of Frank's work in The Observer. And she loves his nutty pieces.
Which he loves.
Yeah.
I also think, is this the scene that just sent me where Joe Fox is scraping caviar off of a plate?
Yes.
And putting it on his plate. And she's like, it's a garnish.
Yeah. She's like, what are you doing? You're taking all the garnish away from everybody. He's like, it's caviar. It's a party. I want it.
So funny.
Yeah.
Then we see more scenes of Kathleen and Joe writing emails to each other, and they still have no idea who they're talking to. And finally, Joe asks if they should meet. Kathleen says, meet? Oh my God, and slams her laptop shut.
Then we see them both out and about around New York, only they see each other now, because now they know each other as Joe and Kathleen. So they're no longer silently crossing paths. However, when one of them sees the other person, they always duck and hide to avoid an interaction because they're so annoyed by each other. And then one day, as Kathleen is checking out at a grocery store, she realizes that she's in a cash-only line, but she only has a credit card. But she was so distracted by the fact that Joe was in the store that she got in the wrong line. And so as Joe is walking out past her, he goes up and convinces the cashier to make an exception and take Kathleen's card, which is nice.
Then we cut to the Fox's Thanksgiving. Abigail, the little girl who is also Joe's aunt, is giving a performance of The Sun Will Come Out.
I did this. I know that I did this exact thing. So just watching it, I was like, this is so painful.
It's so funny. And also, I'm like, wait, these people decorate for Christmas way before Thanksgiving.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess they're decorating their stores, so it makes sense. In New York, too. Then we see Kathleen's Thanksgiving at her place. And her employees, her boyfriend Frank, and their friends are all singing together. And the vibe is very different and a lot more homey than the scene that we just saw at the Fox's house, which was a lot more like serious and fancy and buttoned up.
Then Kathleen decorates the Christmas tree in her store, and she sees a bunch of people walk by with Fox Books bags while her store is quiet. So this is just one of the signs that we're seeing that her store probably isn't doing that well. And then she tells her mystery man in her emails that she always misses her mother around Christmas and wishes that she could ask her for advice.
As Kathleen writes another message to the mystery man, he instant messages her. This is the first time. Usually it's just email back and forth, but this time he sees that she's online and chats her up. She tells him that her business is in trouble, and he tries to give her advice by quoting The Godfather. And he also quoted The Godfather in person when he talked to Kathleen. So she's like, what is it with men and The Godfather? And this reminded me of Barbie, actually. Because isn't The Godfather what all the Kens are watching?
Yes, you're so right. With the Sylvester Stallone and the big fur coat.
They're like, explain The Godfather to me.
Yeah.
I don't get it.
Yeah.
Joe also tells her to remember that business is not personal. It's business, and this is her chance to fight. Which inspires her a little bit.
So Kathleen asks Frank, her boyfriend, to write a piece about her store to help boost business. And then we see the Channel 2 truck show up at her shop. So she's fighting.
Then at the gym, Joe and his friend Kevin, played by Dave Chappelle, run on treadmills, and Kathleen's interview comes on. They also show Joe saying, "I sell cheap books, sue me." And he gets upset because they cut his interview down to that one line and took it out of context to make him look bad. And it's a whole scene. He's just getting really angry in front of all these people at the gym.
Then Kathleen and Frank watch Frank's interview where he talks about her shop, and he's flirting the whole time with the TV host. So this is the first time we get the sense of like, okay, maybe neither of them are really in their relationship for the long haul.
Like they're just comfortable or something.
Yeah.
You know, I wonder if it would have felt better in this movie if they didn't practically live with their partners. You know, I don't think they do live with their partners, either of them, but it was like morning time and we saw both of them with their partners, and it made me think they were married, honestly, within the first scene. Because
because you're right. They both make comments about how they don't live with the other person, but we don't ever see them at home without the other person. So I think you're right.
If we had seen it as more of like a casual thing, maybe it would have felt less gross, even though it still is bad. I just wonder if it would have felt like, oh, we haven't.
They're just dating.
Yeah, we're just dating. We haven't made it serious yet.
Yeah, maybe.
One night, Kathleen messages the mystery man saying, "I need help. Do you still want to meet me?" And he says yes. Then we see him walking to their meetup spot with his friend Kevin, and he's freaking out about whether he's doing the right thing by meeting up with her. And so he gets Kevin to look through the window and spot her for him because he's like kind of nervous too. So Kevin does, and he says, "She's very pretty, and she looks a lot like Kathleen Kelly." And it is Kathleen Kelly, of course. And Joe freaks out and he bails.
But then a few minutes later, we see him walk inside. But he acts like it's a total coincidence that they're both there. And he even makes fun of her for sitting there reading Pride and Prejudice, even though we know that he already knew that that's her favorite book. But then he sits down at her table and orders, and he says he'll leave whenever her friend gets there. And then she calls him a horrible, insensitive person and begs him to leave. So he just moves to the table next to her instead of actually leaving.
We get the iconic scene where she like looks in her mirror compact and Tom Hanks turns around and you just see his face in the mirror. I was dying. It was so funny.
Yeah.
They keep arguing with each other and Joe ends up moving back to her table and she tells him that the man that she's meeting is kind and funny. He's the opposite of Joe. And he actually seems really offended and a little sad that she says this, so he pays his bill and he leaves.
When Kathleen gets home that night, she checks her email, but there's no message from the mystery man. And then at work, she makes a bunch of excuses to everyone about how he must have been held up because there's no way that he would have stood her up.
Kathleen sends him a message asking where he was and saying that she ended up talking to her professional nemesis. She says she finally had the courage to say what she wanted to, but then she felt horrible afterwards.
And then we cut to Joe reading the message, and he starts to type an elaborate excuse for not being there, but he ends up just deleting it. And instead he apologizes and says that he's sure the guy deserved whatever she said. Sad.
Yeah, it is sad. Kathleen tells her employees that she's going to close the store. Her employee Birdie, played by Jean Stapleton from All in the Family, comforts her and tells her that even though she feels like a failure, she's not. It's brave of her to imagine a different life. And here's where we get an inkling that maybe the store has been holding her back because it was like her mother's dream and she was still keeping her mother's dream.
Mm-hmm.
And that maybe there's something else that Kathleen wants to do.
Then Frank and Kathleen go to the movies, and Frank mentions that he could never be with someone who doesn't take politics as seriously as he does. And Kathleen admits that she didn't vote in the last mayoral election because she was getting a manicure instead.
Oh my gosh.
And he forgives her. He's like, "Oh, I forgive you." And she says, "You forgive me?" And then she walks out of the movie, and he follows her, and they end up going to dinner. And Frank admits that he doesn't love her anymore. And Kathleen just laughs and says that she feels the same way. And Frank asks her if there's someone else, and she says, "No, but there's the dream of someone else."
This is the most mutual and kind breakup I've ever seen on TV.
Ever. And also probably the most unrealistic.
I agree.
I'm sure this does happen, especially for couples like this that have just grown so far apart. But everything that we've seen of them is not them growing apart until this.
That's what I'm saying. I feel like they should not have basically lived together, because that made it seem like they were so much more serious than they were.
Yeah.
And what I got from this scene is not that they didn't love each other anymore, but that they were saying that they never loved each other to begin with.
Yeah.
And so I was like, oh, maybe they weren't that serious.
Yeah.
So I feel like, I don't know, I'm not trying to critique a masterpiece here, but I just feel like I needed a little less of them at the beginning.
Yeah, it is weird. You kind of have to suspend the frustration or like suspend the reality of both of them being in serious relationships to buy into their love story fully, I think.
I think so. Then it's closing week at the bookstore, and after work, Kathleen wanders into Fox Books to see what it's like. It's huge, and it definitely is giving Barnes & Noble. And honestly, I think she kind of loves it. Maybe I was just projecting on her because I loved it, but she was she was happy.
Jenny's like, I actually paused the movie and drove to Barnes & Noble. I do love Barnes & Noble, but that was really my only real experience with a bookstore growing up.
Yeah, that was like my biggest
Like
one.
now if I travel or something, I'll like pop into cute little bookstores. But for the most part, growing up, I loved like going and getting a Starbucks hot chocolate and walking around Barnes & Noble, and I can like smell it just thinking about it, you know?
Oh yeah, it's my favorite. It was like my favorite activity to do with my mom and my dad separately. Kathleen sits in the children's section and Joe watches her from afar. I thought this was kind of sweet and sad. Someone is trying to ask an employee in the children's book section for a certain kind of book, and he has no idea what she's talking about. And so Kathleen answers and says what book it is, and then she explains why you should start with a certain book in the series, and it was just so sweet and sad.
Mm-hmm.
And Joe definitely picks up on this fact that, like, there is something special about the customer service aspect of the employees.
Yeah, Fox Books is definitely much less homey and personal.
That night, Patricia tells Joe that she's going to offer Kathleen a job as a children's book editor.
So fun fact about the building that they film Fox Books in, they originally wanted to film in a Barnes & Noble, but they weren't allowed to because Barnes & Noble didn't want to close their doors to customers for the whole time they were filming, which I guess makes sense. So instead, they shot it in a closed Barney's department store in New York that they built out to look like a big bookstore.
Something else we talked about was filmed in a Barney's that was closed.
Ooh.
I wonder if it's the same one.
Was it? It wasn't Elf.
That's what I was thinking it was, but
Okay,
I don't
maybe.
know. We'll have to go back and dig.
Yeah, I'll have to look. I'm curious.
Maybe it's the same one. Interesting.
So then Joe and Patricia get stuck in their apartment building's elevator, and we can tell he has gotten the ick from Patricia. She's being so obnoxious in the elevator, and he's just looking at her like, I cannot do this for one more second. And so then we cut to him moving out of the apartment with his dog and his voiceover telling Kathleen about what happened. And we see that when Joe moves out, he takes his dog and all of his stuff to his boat that we saw earlier in the movie. So he's just going to live from his houseboat.
Must be nice.
Must be nice.
And then Joe's dad and Jillian break up, and he moves his houseboat right next to Joe's. It's obvious that he's done this many times before. Like, his dad has moved onto the houseboat a lot. And they drink together and they talk about all of his dad's failed relationships. And we get the sense that Joe is afraid of becoming too much like his dad.
Yeah, I think he has this realization that they're both sitting there after a breakup with a woman they probably shouldn't have been with to begin with. And his dad is like, haha, you're just like me now. We're both sitting here drinking whiskey after our breakups on our houseboats because we don't have anywhere else to go. And you can tell this affects Joe. But then Joe goes to Kathleen's place with flowers. And Kathleen is sick, but they still like banter and argue like normal. He puts the flowers in water and he makes her tea. And he even remembered that daisies are her favorite, so that's what he brought her. He says he knows that Kathleen will never forgive him for putting her out of business, quote, just like Elizabeth in Pride and Prejudice. And he tells her that putting her out of business wasn't personal, and she just says, all that means is it wasn't personal to you, but it was to me.
I found out that this is also a movie that people watch when they're sick, which makes total sense.
I could totally see that.
And honestly, I need a sick routine. Like, when I'm sick, I need something to look forward to. So maybe I'll add this.
This is a good one.
Joe asks about the guy that she was waiting for in the cafe, and she admits that she doesn't actually know him. Joe accidentally says something very similar to what Kathleen said in one of her messages, and we can see that she's suspicious, but she hasn't quite figured it out.
So she sends another message to the mystery guy to say that they should meet, but his response is that he's in the middle of a work project that needs tweaking, so he can't. And then we see her ask Joe for advice of what to say, and he says to ask the mystery guy if he's married, because that's a weird response. And then we see now that they meet up all the time to discuss Kathleen's responses, and Joe is helping her craft responses, and then he's like basically writing fake ones back to her. It's very cute.
This part actually makes me think of When Harry Met Sally.
Yeah.
Because it's the whole enemies to friends thing.
Definitely.
Then Joe asks if she wants to hang out for lunch on Saturday, but then he messages her and asks to hang out on Saturday at 4 p.m. after lunch. So she's got 2 dates, basically. One with Joe at lunchtime, and then one afterwards with the mystery guy.
When they're together for lunch, he asks her what would have happened if he hadn't been Fox Books. He says that he would have asked for her number and wouldn't have been able to wait even 24 hours to ask her out. And then he says, if only. And she's like so in awe of this, but also like so thrown off by like, oh my God, I thought you were just my friend that was helping me get with this mystery online guy. While they're talking, he asks how she can forgive this random mystery guy for standing her up and not forgive him for this tiny little thing like putting her out of business. And he says that he wishes she would, but then she says she has to go and she runs off.
I kind of hate him for this.
Yeah.
Maybe when we get to the end, let's debrief the whole putting her out of business thing.
Okay.
But what happens next is that she goes to the park where she's supposed to meet the mystery man. But suddenly Joe is there chasing after his dog, and he walks up to her and she starts crying. And he says, "Don't cry, shop girl." And she says, "I wanted it to be you. I wanted it to be you so badly." And they kiss. And that's the end.
Okay, let's discuss. Part of me did not love her saying, "I wanted it to be you," because I feel like we as the audience didn't see her wanting it to be Joe. Or maybe you did. I did not feel like I saw that. We saw a lot of him wanting to be with her, I thought, or a lot of like, you know, the shot of him in the bookstore looking at her doing such a good job talking to one of his customers, or like him admiring her when his like girlfriend said that she wanted to give her a job. You know, like there were just all these moments that we saw where Joe was like, oh, she is really special. And then he was a dick and just like self-sabotaging. So I feel like we got that side of the story very much. And then we didn't get a lot of her side of the story of like how she really loved Joe, right?
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that the flip happened for her when he came over to her place when she was sick and said that thing that made her think of the emails. And then she was like, wait, he might be the guy.
Mm.
And then maybe as they continued to hang out, she kept trying to figure out if he was the guy.
Yeah.
But we didn't see that. So how would we know?
Yeah, I wish we had a couple more really short scenes of like her with Christina or someone else that works at the bookshop or something of her being like, of her trying to figure out who it is, and maybe even someone else being like, oh my God, could you imagine if it was Joe? And then her being like, no, but then he says that thing and she's like, Like, I wish we had seen her piece it together a little bit more, because then I think that would have made this an even better payoff. But it's still such a cute ending.
Yeah. What I also needed more of was why it was good for her to close the bookstore.
Me too.
Because minus like a couple lines here and there about what she was up to after the bookstore, I feel like he crushed her dreams, got rid of her childhood memory that her mom, who had passed away, had given to her. He never really apologized or took credit for his actions. He was like, can you forgive this one small thing that I did to you? It wasn't personal. When it like ruined her entire life and her employees' lives.
Mm-hmm.
And they were all out of a job.
I know, I totally agree. Like, I wish that we had seen more angst of her maybe running the bookstore, like where we could feel the weight of her doing this just because of her mom, you know?
Yeah.
I'm thinking almost of, you know, in the movie, He's Just Not That Into You. At the end, spoiler alert, if you haven't seen it, skip ahead like 30 seconds. When Janine breaks up with Bradley Cooper.
Yes.
And it's like devastating for her, but you can tell she also feels relieved that she's like, I get to start over, and I didn't think I was gonna. I was like ready to fight for it, but now that's not my battle anymore. That's what I wanted to feel when the bookstore closed.
Yeah, like I think she said she was relieved, but we didn't feel it, you know? And we didn't see her working on her book and getting excited about it. And we didn't see like all the opportunities she had once she wasn't at the bookstore anymore.
Yeah.
We only saw her thriving in the bookstore and being really good at that.
Mm-hmm.
That's my qualm with it, really, is that like Joe Fox is kind of an asshole. I don't know that I felt like everything paid off for them to be together.
Yeah. I totally agree. I think those are the right two critiques that would have made it feel even more satisfying to me, I think.
Yeah. Still a very cute, sweet movie.
Yeah.
Very nostalgic, even though I hadn't seen it. It was very cozy.
Very cozy. I was just about to say that.
And I just love the sets. Like, I'll say it again. I loved it.
Mm-hmm.
Beyond just the Barnes & Noble, Fox Books set. Like, everything. Just the homes. I'll add them to my Pinterest board, honestly.
Mm-hmm. Talking about this movie the week after we talked about Nobody Wants This does give me a new sense of appreciation for the fact that newer rom-coms don't necessarily feel the need to lean so heavily on the enemies to lovers trope. Because we get less asshole boys, I think.
That's true. We didn't like Harry in When Harry Met Sally either.
Right. We're just like, no, they're kind of assholes, actually. I get why he loves her, because she's great. But, like, he kind of sucks. Not even to say that I actually love a lot of things about Joe Fox in this movie.
Oh, yeah.
But, like, I like the hot rabbi more. Nobody wants this, you know? So I appreciate that. I appreciate that we, you know, I feel like we're seeing more creative rom-com plots now.
I agree. Is Tom Hanks's character in Sleepless in Seattle also a jerk or no? I can't remember.
I don't think so.
Okay. So I was wondering if this was just a Nora Ephron thing, like if she just really likes to have kind of rough around the edges boy characters.
Could be. Yeah, well, I'm sure we're going to cover it, and when we do, we can assess, because I feel like I remember him being great, but I don't know how much of that is just my rose-colored glasses because I love that movie.
I think I thought every male lead in rom-coms was great when I was younger, and now I'm like, wait a second.
This is good. That's good. That's a good sign. Our standards have raised.
Times have changed. Yeah. My frontal lobe is developed.
That's right. We hit 24.
A while ago. Well, thank you guys so much for listening to this episode. It was really fun for me to watch this movie.
And get excited for a few more weeks of fun fall classics.
I am excited. I cannot wait for our next one.
I know. And
also, just a reminder, because I am genuinely curious, please share your top 4 movies with us on Instagram. Just message us at What We're Watching Pod. I gotta know.
We gotta know. I would love to know. And we'll be back next week.
Bye.